Okay, this should be our third and final video on budgeting projects. So we've talked about different ways of developing an estimate or budget for a project and looking at reserves that can be used for things that are unexpected. And we're going to continue that idea of reserves and look at a couple different ways of categorizing risks in projects. And I think we'll be looking more at risk in the following chapter. But for now, we can categorize risks in these three categories. Known knowns. So these are things that we know that are very we're very familiar with them. We've seen them before. We know they're likely to occur again, and we know how to plan for them. So these are the least risky, the known knowns. And we have known unknowns. So they're things that we know, but don't know whether or not they will occur. So essentially, it's just on a spectrum. We're getting a little further away from what we can reliably predict. So there are things that we know could happen. We just basically don't know whether or not they will. And then the last category here, the last type of category here are the unknown unknowns, or unk-unks, as the author refers to them. These are things that are completely unpredictable, things that we would have no way of predicting would occur. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare for them. So that's what the management reserve is used for. A management reserve is basically funds set aside to deal with completely unexpected circumstances. And so we need to be prepared for things that we know are very likely to occur, as well as for the potentiality of things that are completely unpredictable and everything in between. So as I was saying in the previous video, we not only need to look at the total cost of a project, but we need to look at how those costs come about throughout the life of a project. So, if you're going to, say, build a house, I keep using that as an example, you wouldn't necessarily need to go out and buy all the materials up front. You might first need to buy the concrete or masonry block and rebar in order to build the foundation. And then maybe the plumbing pipes you would put in before you pour the slab, and so on and so forth. So the costs are not all up front, they occur over time. And as the project develops and you are spending more and more money for material and labor and equipment and everything else that's needed to complete the project, you are hopefully receiving revenue. You are being paid to do this project. But again, you don't get paid all the money up front. You get paid over time in installments. And so you need to plan for that and make sure that you will have the cash on hand to purchase what you need at any given point in time throughout the project. And so that is part of how the budget management comes into play. There are some things that you might need to postpone or delay within the project the purchase of until you reach a point in time where you have the funds available to spend. So if we look at this chart on the following slide, this shows the dashed line here shows the cumulative costs throughout a project. So they just continue to go up and up and up and up at an irregular rate. So it's just kind of this kind of wavy line that's trending up. The revenue, however, is more predictable. We get paid and then that amount of money or plateaus until our next pay. And again, this is different for different projects. It could be based on certain project milestones. It could be monthly. It could be weekly. But what we need to make sure is that this stair-stepped revenue projection stays above our total cost. So it looks like we've got a couple points here where we might actually, the costs might be slightly exceeding the revenue. That may or may not present an issue. Depends on if you are paying cash up front for everything, or perhaps you have a line of credit with your material suppliers where you can pay them at a later time. So it's just something to be aware of, something that a project manager has to look out for. Looking at costs, it's more than just the total dollar amount, but the amount with respect to time throughout the completion of the project. So again, in conclusion here, this is the last slide. We want to make sure that we are controlling costs throughout a project. So a project manager needs to be aware of, excuse me, of the money being spent and making sure that the revenue is in place to cover those costs. The budget, the predicted budget is essentially the guideline that you want to be following. Of course, no project goes exactly according to plan, but as much as possible, you want to try to manage things so that you follow that guideline. Milestones are just, they present natural points to reflect and look back at the money spent up until that point, how much money remains in the budget, and making a comparison of how you're doing versus how you expected to be at that point. It may cause some changes to be made to the plan depending on whether you're on track or not. And then, looking forward at the cash flow projections, you need to make sure that the funding will be there to reach each milestone. So just something to keep in mind as a project manager. Money and time are two of the most important things in a project, and they need to be managed. And so you need to be sure to keep a close eye on these things as the project winds its way to completion. So that does it for our budgeting chapter. Take a look at the homework online. Any questions you may have can be asked on the discussion board.